Hey, it's Michael Angelo Caruso. I'm here with Bob Wiltfong. How are you, Bob?
Hey, good, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you again, brother. Bob is a
Yes.
fascinating cat. He's got a fascinating rearview mirror, everybody. He's been in comedy forever. He's been on a major TV show that you know about, and we're going to talk about his career highlights, the state of comedy in general, and a few things we have in common. Before we get started, I want to thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to this channel. We've got more interesting interviews coming up. And if you like what you're hearing, you want to click that silver bell so that you're notified of new content. Also, if you're listening on a Podbean or iTunes format, make sure that you check out the YouTube channel and let us know what you like. I haven't seen you since we were together on the speaking platform for a Rotary District event in Florida, which was Jacksonville, I think.
Yeah.
And they pressed
And
you
I was
into
dressed as
service. What?
a pirate
I
when
was
we
going to
last
say
saw each other. Yeah.
they pressed you into service as a kind of a pirate MC, and you were
Yeah.
great, man.
Oh, thanks.
I even asked you
Thanks.
about,
I never know I had that inner pirate in me
yeah, well,
until that event.
don't we all?
Yeah.
I asked you about your dialect that day, and you said you just watched a bunch of Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Yeah. It's kind of a really bad Hackney English accent that came to mind. It's like, "Arr, your matey,"
It was
this
great.
kind of thing.
You had
Yeah.
this great elaborate costume on, and I remember you had a wristwatch, like all good MCs. You were checking
Oh,
the time
right.
on occasion.
Yeah. Like all good pirates have. Right.
And
Wristwatches.
your vocabulary, I noticed, because if anybody studies the language, there's certain key words that you got to keep coming back to, and one of your pirate words
Yeah.
was scurvy.
Scurvy and barnacle and scallywag.
That's funny.
Yeah, thank God for Google, Michael. As I told you on
Yes,
the day, that's how I found that language. Just Googled pirate themes and our pirate words, and there was like multiple hits of
I
like,
used
oh,
to
here's a whole list of pirate terms.
I used to be in
So,
the music business, and when we were songwriting, if you wanted a word that rhymed with something, good luck.
ah,
There was no way to find
yeah,
out. Now you can Google um,
boom,
words that rhyme with interloper, 3 syllables,
yeah,
or eight
yeah.
letters, and it'll come up
Orange,
for you.
yeah,
Yeah,
orange is no longer a mystery
that's
thanks
right.
to
That's right.
yeah, yeah,
Well, we have so much in common, and there's so many things I want to ask you about. Let's start with your vacation, man. I know you just got back, and I'm jealous because I'm
yeah.
Italian and I've never been to the mother country. How would you rate?
Ah.
How would you rate your time in Italy?
It was great. We're very fortunate in our life right now. I'm married. I won the lottery when I married, not only because I married a beautiful woman who I love and she loves me, thankfully, but she does very well for herself professionally. And so as a result, we get the luxury of traveling nicely with our kids. So we have three
Beautiful.
teenagers right now, and so we went to Italy with them, shared that adventure, went to Rome, Venice, Bologna, and then did a cruise around the Mediterranean, including Greece and Turkey. So it was great, but it's also very nice to be back home,
Very
Michael.
good.
Yeah.
By the way, back to words again. I believe it's pronounced baloney.
Oh, Bologna. There you
Baloney.
go.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
okay.
Good.
You were just there for a couple days.
Yeah, I've been there too long. It's good to be corrected. Yeah.
Well, Italy awaits me, and I'll have Italy envy until then. Welcome home.
Yeah.
I appreciate you
Thanks.
doing this today because I'm always interested in comedians' takes on comedy. It's kind of like it's easy to find people who are Rod Stewart fans, and you ask, well, what's your favorite Rod Stewart song or phase of his life, that kind of thing. It's harder to find
Mhm.
people, I think, to talk intelligently about humor. Do you think that's
Uh,
true? Is that like a specialty topic for most people?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's sort of like the inside baseball
That's
conversation,
right.
right? There are people that are fans of baseball, and then there are people that know the game and can really dive deep into it. And I think with humor and comedy in general, I came from the discipline of improv comedy, which is kind of a subset of comedy. And one of the monikers that we labeled ourselves, at least when I was actively involved with it, is we are improv nerds. There's like people like improv, and then there are people that can talk about it in depth. and admire the moves that are made by different players in different scenes.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those guys. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can go deep with some of this stuff.
And I think the average person is just looking for the set and the turn, and they don't even know what it's called. They think of it as
Right.
a punchline or a joke in its totality.
Yeah.
But you guys, man, you know all the nuance and these little things that are
Yeah.
happening and the
Yeah.
context and the timing.
You know, I think it's very similar to musicians. Like when
Yeah,
I just watched some documentaries about Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys,
yeah,
right? When you talk to fellow musicians, there's an admiration for how he produced songs and what he brought to the musical landscape as a pop artist and a
yes,
producer
yeah,
that is really fascinating to fellow musicians, and they appreciate the art of it. For a person like me, I just trust that they know best.
yeah,
So with with comedy, there are people that aren't household names, but are well known within the comedy world because of what they do as an artist
yeah,
in that world. And then there's, the household names. So yeah, I
yeah.
think it's very similar to musicians talking about fellow musicians when it comes
I
to
think
comedy with me.
that's one of the reasons I like the Seinfeld show about comedians in cars getting
Yeah.
coffee, is
Yeah.
that it's a bit of inside baseball. I think they probably leave out the most technical stuff, but when they're talking about
Yeah.
why a riff or routine worked, I just love getting under the hood and hearing how the mechanics talk about making the engine hum. Oh, I love that
Yeah.
so much. And I hope we get a chance to do a little bit of that today for our friends who like humor and comedy.
Yeah. Yeah. The efficiency of Jerry Seinfeld is, admirable. He
Of
he
course,
he fine tunes jokes till there's a word that maybe it needs to be left out or put in to
which is
make it just so.
fascinating just in and of itself because we don't really think of comedians as being efficient. That's not like one of the top
Yeah.
100 adjectives that you'd apply to anybody that's in the funny
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
Um,
That's one of the things that separates people. It's just the efficiency of joke telling. Yeah.
so let's start with the banal Fred Flintstone question. People ask you who your favorite comedian is. Is that an easy answer?
Yeah, there's definitely comedians that come to mind. I think for me, I was born, I was a child of the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
So
You're
that's
lucky
going
to
to
be alive.
influence my, yes, exactly. So that's going to influence my answer or my thoughts a little bit. Richard Pryor is one of the first ones that come to mind because he was so funny and so true.
Yeah.
And that's been an inspiration for me in my own comedy telling your story,
Yeah.
and that there's nobody on the planet that's like you. So tell your story.
He was
He's definitely inspiration.
one of the first truth tellers, and what made Pryor super interesting was that he had some he had some strange shit happen to him.
Oh, he had
And just by
horrible stuff
going on
happen to him.
stage and talking about it and poking fun at
Yeah.
himself, setting himself on fire, the
Yeah.
fights that he had, famous fights that he had with his women, many
Yeah.
cases his wives. People didn't
Yeah.
talk about that stuff back then.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in a lot of ways with comedians, there's a school of thought, and it's brought up in the Jerry Seinfeld documentary Comedian, where they explore this. I think it's I forget the comedian's name, but he says he's an established comedian, and he says young comedians come up to him and say, "How can I be funny?" And he said, "The key isn't to try to be funny; it's to try to figure out what makes you angry and talk about that." And
Right.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. And from my own professional experience, we'll get into this a little bit later. Jon Stewart is also a guy who's influenced by that feeling. Find out what makes you really upset, and then that's what you write comedy about. It's not what makes you laugh; it's what makes you angry.
They said that in music too, like a lot of musicians do their best work when they're young. Billy Joel, he's doing stadium tours now in his 70s,
Yeah,
was just here at
yeah.
Comerica Park in Detroit. And the
Ah,
reviews were amazing, right? He had a
yeah. He's
song back in
great.
the day. It was actually called Angry Young Man.
Oh, yeah.
So what is it about anger and that it's almost anger is like a violent emotion. What is it about that
Yeah.
that is so creative? Have you ever tapped into that?
Yeah, I think I've got a couple of thoughts on that. One, I think part of a comedian's job, if they're doing their job well, and to me, it's the sign of a healthy society when they're allowed to do this,
Yeah.
is that they're commenting on things and shining a spotlight on what's wrong. And I think that that's part of anger, right? Of watching things that don't make sense
Yeah.
and calling it out and laughing about how stupid the thing is
Yeah.
that you're laughing about.
If
So
not
I think
anger,
there's,
if not anger, which I described a minute ago as violent, then it's an irritant at the very least. It's on
oh
the
yeah,
negative side of the emotion scale. I'm annoyed by this. Let me tell you why I'm annoyed by
right,
it. Right?
right.
I might have
And I
interrupted.
think the key for a key for a comedian is finding that irritant and then finding the relatability,
Yeah.
the humanity in that,
Yeah.
and also not putting themselves out of the spectrum of being the irritant. So if, not saying, oh, all these people outside of me are stupid. It's like, hey, I'm stupid too,
Yeah.
because I do the same stuff.
Yeah.
It's just calling out truth.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what, part of my professional background. I crossed paths with Amy Poehler before she was on Saturday Night Live. She was one of my improv comedy teachers, and she subscribes to that same school of thought. So I became a student of that. Of part of our job as comedians is to shine a light on what's going on
Yeah.
and to satirize, things that don't make sense.
I've heard that good comedians say the things that other people are only thinking,
Yes.
which is a
Yeah.
similar concept, right? That back to that truth, I'm going to speak the truth even though most people don't have the courage to say it. I also
Yeah.
heard one
And I
time,
think,
go ahead.
well, I think there's also a line that I've realized as I've gotten older. There's also the edit is very key in all that too, Michael. I think there's a benefit in sometimes not saying things
Yeah.
that I think young comedians start to say, well, I'm just going to spout off about everything I see stupid, and realize that, there's value in sometimes not saying anything,
Yeah.
um, that has some value.
That's interesting. And then you could play with the timing of it. So there's saying it and saying it quickly, and there's not saying it at all. And then there's
Yeah.
like this Stephen Wright, um, these slow comedians, where you're doing like the slow
Yeah.
burn, where you almost,
Yeah.
Cosby did it. The audience almost gets there before the comedian does because it's
Yes.
so obvious where he's going. Like all the
Yeah.
signposts are there, right? And that's fun
Yeah.
because it makes it really interactive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let the audience make their conclusions. You don't have to connect the dots sometimes. And that's the brilliance of good comedians too.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Um, I saw the recent George Carlin American Dream documentary. I think I pinged you
Yeah.
about it. You said at the time you hadn't seen it. I assume that's still true.
Yeah. Still true.
It's an okay deal. Um, Carlin was interesting because he was also intellectual. He was also like super irritated. That was,
Hmm.
in fact, in the second stage of his career when he really got the afterburners glowing, it was all about the rage, the outrage,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
for various reasons. And he ended very angry. In fact, a
Yeah.
couple of the celebrities were saying, who was it? Stephen Colbert said that Carlin lost him at the end. He was just over the top angry. So there is a limit
Yeah.
to what people want to hear on a comedy stage from,
Yeah.
in terms of the negative emotions.
I totally agree. I saw Carlin when I was in college.
Okay.
And I don't know how long before he passed after I saw him, but yeah, my first reaction when I saw him there is it's like this is an angry old man diatribe,
Mm,
less than a comedy set.
yeah.
And I think Lenny Bruce fell into that same category. You start to forget about the art of joke telling and the power of satirization, and start to just feel like, oh, I've got this stage, so I'm just going to tell the world what I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, Bruce
yeah,
had
which
other
anybody can
issues.
do. Yeah,
Yeah. Bruce had other issues um,
yeah,
because unlike Pryor, Bruce was such a forerunner on telling the truth
yeah,
that he was getting arrested rather regularly. In fact, Carlin
yeah.
tells the famous story. He was actually arrested with Lenny Bruce at one of Lenny Bruce's shows. That was an interesting
Oh,
story.
wow. Ah,
But if you're afraid and you're mitigating your speech and your legal problems are starting to encroach upon your lifestyle, that's got to affect your sense of humor.
yeah, totally. And you know what's different about the current climate of comedy is you saw this with Chris Rock, you saw this with Dave Chappelle at the Hollywood Bowl recently, is now it's like I've got to be careful what I'm saying because the audience can actually come up and attack me,
This is
uh,
true in a lot of
which
areas
is
of
scary.
life. I mean, think
Yeah,
about just recently, this is June of 22, everybody, if you're listening. Just recently, in America, people have gone to the homes of Supreme Court justices.
Yeah.
Somebody just broke into the president, I think they have a president of Sri Lanka, into his house, started
Wow.
cooking up food, jumping in his pool. Then they set the place on fire.
Wow.
But we live in sensitive times for truth tellers, and I'm not
Yeah.
saying I'm an advocate of the Supreme Court justice any more than I am the president of of Sri Lanka. This is not a political statement. It's just saying that that we live in sensitive times, and people have access now. You know, you can find out where anybody lives again thanks to Google.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that mean to comedy and free speech and Bill
I
Burr
do,
seems
you
Bill
know,
Burr, as an example, seems to have gotten away
yeah.
with it so far. I mean, this guy's pretty
Yeah.
direct. How does he do
Yes.
that?
I don't know. I think he's playing with fire, to be honest with you. I think it's just a matter of time before Bill Burr says something that he gets canceled for. You
Well,
know
he
what I'm
is as
saying?
edgy as anybody is right
Yeah.
now, and so far he's been unaffected by it. But I agree.
Yeah.
And that's in a way it's sad because he's telling truths that make me belly laugh. But
Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
in the back of my head, because of the culture we live in, I'm like, how did you just get away with that?
Yeah. 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 It's a very interesting time. I think there has, I think the only answer to that is we have to better define what is appropriate protest and what is over the line.
Yeah.
And I think there was a political conversation just this past weekend on one of the Sunday morning talk shows. And again, I don't want to get political on this, but I think there's some truth in this, that in America, we are allowed to protest. That's part of one of the things that makes this country great, is the freedom to speak our minds without repercussions, right?
Right.
But that doesn't mean that allows you to go to a person's home and break in and, cook in their house. That's wrong. You can't attack somebody physically because you disagree with them. That's
Yeah.
wrong. That's an
Right.
inherent human thing.
Well, free
So,
speech.
but we live in a society where it's hard to know that difference sometimes.
Yeah. Well, it's because because we're so ham-handed in the way we think about things. You know, even free speech has always had exceptions. You've never been
Yeah.
allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater,
Right. Yeah.
right? So just because it's free doesn't mean it's appropriate. And people have trouble,
Yes.
I think, sometimes discerning the difference. I think
Yeah.
Gervais, who is another favorite of mine, has been artful at trying to explain, not successful, but artful at
Yeah.
trying to explain it's just a joke.
Yeah.
I'm not making fun of the person, I'm making fun of what happened, right? It's a
Yes.
big difference
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
haters will say to Gervais, the cancelers, you must hate women because you made a joke about women. He says, no, it's the context. I'm making fun of the context and the silliness of the context. I'm not making fun of women. I think that nuance is
Yeah.
lost on most people. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so too. It's a very fine line between being a truth teller and being a mean bully,
Yeah.
or being insensitive. And I think what you mentioned earlier, Michael, is the key, is being appropriate,
Yeah.
that the context is important, and knowing that there are times when you can say things and there are times when it's best to just be quiet and
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah.
Um, and it's hard to know sometimes. You got to make those snap judgments, and sometimes people fail at doing it.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Um, Tell us more about your storied career. How did you said
Yeah.
did you get started in improv? Is that how you came up?
Well, I got started. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, went to school at the
Wait a
University of
second.
Kansas for
Wait
a
a
bar.
second.
Oh, yeah.
There's no humor in Nebraska.
Johnny Carson, man, came from
Oh,
Nebraska.
that's
That's
right.
one of our,
Johnny
yeah,
Carson.
yeah, yeah. No, there's funny people there.
Okay.
But I get your point. I get your joke. Um, Grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, went to University of Kansas, and I majored in broadcast news journalism. I wanted to be a TV news reporter because I didn't know any other path to get to where I ultimately thought would be fun to get, which was Saturday Night Live.
Okay.
So my bright idea was I was going to be a TV news reporter. I was going to fulfill some of my other passions, which is history and storytelling. And I did that for a while. And then lo and behold, in 1998, got a job at a 24-hour local news channel in Long Island, New York, at News 12 Long Island. And when I landed in New York from Wichita, Kansas, this is where I came from. At the time I was working in Wichita, I realized I finally had a chance to pursue this improv comedy thing that had been in the back of my head since I was like 16 or 17 years old. And so I called up Second City in Chicago because they were the mecca of my heroes, my John Belushi's, my Bill Murray's. And I said, hey, is there anybody that does similar stuff to what you do in Chicago? And they referred me to the Upright Citizen Brigade that had just started in New York. And that's how Amy Poehler and I crossed paths. And I started to do improv comedy. And then lo and behold, September 11th happens. And 6 months after September 11th, I have a reckoning, a calling of like, life is short and I'm not doing what I love to do. So I want to pursue this dream of being an actor and a comedian. And I quit TV news and became an unemployed actor, like most people are in acting. We are unemployed and periodically interrupted by work as actors. And I got lucky because I did a one-man show in New York that got well received over the years and put me on the radar of the Chappelle Show and the Daily Show.
What was the name of the one-man show?
It was called Anchors Away,
Okay.
and it was a truth telling story. It started as my showcase for Saturday Night Live. I was doing original character monologues and trying to get on the radar of Saturday Night Live, and it did that to a certain degree. But then the feedback I got from audiences and directors, and the more I performed it, was they wanted to see less the character monologues and more of the truth of my story, of why I got out of TV news, of what I was trying to do as a comedian in New York and being this Omaha, Nebraska kid doing it. And so it became a truth telling story more so than a ha funny character monologue one-man
That's,
show.
I'll bet that blew your mind
Yeah.
because you never thought the Nebraska piece would be that interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't think so. And a friend of mine who was also in comedy at the time gave me a great note. She's gone on to now be a producer of Superstore, the NBC show, and some other stuff that you would see on TV. But she said, Bob, your story is unique. There's a lot of East Coast kids who are in New York City trying to make it big. You're like the only Nebraskan I can think of who has like this regular 9 to 5 career job in TV news.
Yeah.
So tell people about it. So that's what I did.
Um, I know that both of us are currently involved with teaching people presentation skills, helping them be more
Yeah.
effective from the front of the room.
Mhm.
And, you know, looking back on this now, it's obvious to me, perhaps obvious to you, that the story is everything. You know,
Oh yeah.
you can do the song and dance, the clown show, the skits, but when
Yeah.
you're sharing your backstory simultaneously, you become a real person. It's like making yourself three-dimensional. Everybody does
Yeah.
this now. Um, Springsteen did it in a Broadway show. Mitch Albom did it with Tuesdays with Maury. I don't know if you read
Yeah.
that book, but it's a
Yeah.
fantastic
It's
book
a great
about
book.
for those of you that don't know, he goes to visit one of his old college teachers who's dying of cancer. He only goes on Tuesdays, so it's called Tuesdays with Maury. But every other
Mhm.
chapter is about Mitch Albom and his interesting career.
Yeah.
So that interweaving thing actually makes you funnier. Back to truth again, right? If there's not enough truth
Yeah.
in the comedy, we're going to get it from your personal life.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Michael. One of the things I teach in we are we're on the same path professionally because I've been a presentation skills coach for about 20 years now,
Yeah,
and you too. And one of the things that is the great thing about storytelling is it brings the heart to all this data and mind stuff.
yeah,
So one of the things I say about storytelling with the people that I teach is, it gives your data wings. It touches the heart before it reaches the mind. And that's
yeah,
the power of it.
yeah,
That we as humans are hungry for stories and other human experiences. So
yeah.
that's what stories do.
I imagine if people visit you on YouTube, they'll get some free presentation tips.
Sure, why not? I'm here.
Wilt,
Yeah,
Wiltfong is Wiltfong, everybody. Bob Wiltfong on YouTube.
you got it.
So take me through the Chappelle Daily Show transition and because that's heady stuff, man. That is rarefied air. Chappelle at the time wasn't who Chappelle is today, he had this
Right.
kind of small show, almost a cult following initially. Were you part of the
Yeah.
beginning of that show?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. It just goes, I've had a couple of times in my comedy career that are reminders that you never know what's going to come back to you. So wherever you're at, treat people nicely
Yeah.
and treat people with kindness and consideration. So with Chappelle, where that started is I was taking classes at the Upright Citizens Brigade, right? And they had a comedy sketch show on Comedy Central that I became an extra, a background player for. As a performer at their theater, they recruited us to do background, which is just, I'm basically half of my face in the background of a sketch. And on one of the days of shooting that, I happened to go back into New York. We were shooting in New Jersey, and I had a car ride with um, Joy Behar's daughter,
Oh,
who was working on the show. And I shared with her my background as a TV news reporter, right? And lo and behold, a couple years later, Dave Chappelle comes to Comedy Central, and he's shooting a pilot for a sketch show that becomes Chappelle Show. And they need a TV news reporter character that is good at improv. And at that point, I had a couple more years of experience in improv. And Joyce Behar's daughter, Comedy Central said, well, there's this guy who does this thing. He's a legitimate TV news reporter. So they contact me and said, can you send me some of your funny TV news stuff? So I did. Long story short, I got cast in the pilot for Chappelle Show
wow.
in that role. And that became, if you're familiar with that show, for those listeners who are, Slavery Reparations. It's kind of an iconic sketch with Chappelle Show where the premise is all these Black people get money and then they spend it on horrible, wasteful things.
Yeah.
So I become the Wall Street reporter who reports on all the things that they're spending their money on. And that led to other roles in Chappelle. Chappelle Show blows up, becomes this, you're absolutely right. It becomes this kind of niche thing to this spreading out. The rest of society becomes aware of this thing. And that helped me kind of get hot in the business. And so about a year or two after that, my memory is that I got cast on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart as a result of that.
So Chappelle was filming where or recording where?
He shot right around New York City. So there was a studio, I think maybe in Brooklyn, that
Okay.
they shot the interstitials with him in front of a studio audience. Then we shot the sketches at different locations.
So is it that easy? It happened again. By the way, most comedians have trouble getting it to getting it to happen once is incredibly difficult. It
Yeah.
happened a second time. This
Yeah.
simply, somebody saw you on the Chappelle Show and recommended you for the Daily Show.
Yeah. At that point, I was establishing myself. Because I was joyful about it. And that was another thing I pass along to anybody who wants to become an actor or any field that you're pursuing a dream in, is let your joy drive your decisions. So
Yeah.
I was just joyful about doing improv. And as a result, I got better and better at it and got bigger and bigger audiences in front of me. And so my rise at Chappelle was also mirroring or reflecting my rise in improv in live theater. So I was becoming a more and more well-known improviser at the same time. So that made it easy for Daily Show to say, okay, we're spanning the US market for young up and coming improv based comedians. This guy fits the bill. So let's bring him in for an audition.
Love it. Now,
So that's how it happened.
what year did you transition from Chappelle to Stewart?
I don't know when that all hit. I know that I quit TV news in 2002, March 2002. I know that I had my first piece air on the Daily Show in May of 2004. So, and I think it felt like forever at the time, but it isn't that long now. I look back on it. I think a year before that first Daily Show piece is probably when I did my first Chappelle Show.
Was it like moving from the National League to the American League? Was it like moving from, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, because I'm talking now about budgets and reputation and ratings and how many eyeballs are
Oh, yeah.
seeing you. Was it like moving at the time from the minor leagues to the major leagues?
With Chappelle to Daily Show?
Yeah.
Not really, because Chappelle was pretty hot.
Okay.
Chappelle at the time was a bigger deal in society. It captured more of the zeitgeist than the Daily Show even had at that point, I think.
So why leave?
For like a year or two. Yeah, Chappelle Show was the show. So it made it, I think I was more appealing to Daily Show because I was coming off Chappelle than the other way around.
Was it a better
Um,
deal, or was it appealing because you had timed out on Chappelle? Why make the change?
because Daily Show offered. Chappelle Show was, it's an actor gig, so you're hired just for the day to do a sketch.
Oh,
I wasn't a regular. They didn't have a regular cast except Dave
okay.
Chappelle, right, and some of his close friends, and I was just a person they dropped into reoccurring, to sketches. Daily Show was much more like we have a stable of correspondents that we rely on to fill content on a regular basis, and we want you to be one of those people.
Yeah, it would seem like more
So
of a team, a cast of players. So clearly Stewart was
yes,
the star of the show, but you kept seeing the same recurring people. And there's something appealing
yeah.
about that. I was surprised to learn the other day that Colbert has 100 people on payroll.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. It takes a lot of people to make that kind of content on a regular basis and make it entertaining.
Yeah, you got to really churn it
Yeah.
out. And I don't know if y'all remember this, but The Daily Show was on every day.
Yeah, yeah, every day. I mean, it's a grind. So I know when I worked there, Jon Stewart probably had about 15 to 20 writers that were devoted to just coming up with material for the day in, day out content that was needed for that show. And then in addition, he had correspondence with field producers who produced the field pieces that also, took up a chunk of the time.
I read the book, the oral history of The Daily Show.
Ah,
And one of
yeah.
the fascinating, again, inside baseball things that I learned was that Stewart, I might probably have the details of this wrong, but he pioneered slash developed software that could peruse every piece of video produced in the last week about barbecues
Ah,
and then pull that content in a very timely manner so that they could excerpt it and put it in bits. Do you remember how
yeah.
that worked?
I don't remember an algorithm or something that was like, just press a button and it got all that information. At the time I was there, it was interns.
Okay.
So interns were assigned to watch like Fox News or CNN
Yeah.
and look for stuff that might be usable,
Right.
and inspire the writers to come up with stuff.
I'm pretty sure
So I
now
know
there's
ESPN. What's that?
I'm pretty sure now there's a piece of software, and he actually named it in the book. The name escapes me. So
Yeah,
now they think
it could
about how
be.
comedy's produced. Now, if they want to do a bit about barbecues, they can use the software to pull all this stuff that they would take
Yeah,
the interns, months to find.
yeah, it makes
And
sense.
and they're not the only
Makes
ones
sense.
using it. You see other shows, and you're like, where the hell did they find that clip? It's through this
Yeah, yeah.
software.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would do that. I know, like ESPN, for example, they have a whole bunch of people, I would imagine, who are watching all the sports, or maybe they're doing it through algorithms as well. But there's so much stuff going on if you're
I
trying to
know.
capture it in 60 minutes that you need people to say, hey, here's an incredible play from this double-A baseball game in Montgomery, Alabama,
Yeah.
that we got to show.
And the producers
There's
love this because
people.
this is analogous to I need an 8 letter word that rhymes with introvert.
Right,
And so
right, right, right.
it's
Yeah,
really punched up the way content is delivered. So what did
yeah.
how long were you with Jon Stewart?
I was only there a year, and one of the odd things about at least in my estimation, one of the odd arrangements there is he would have and I don't know why they did this. They had correspondents that were full-time employees, and then they had freelance people that they would bring in periodically or work as full-timers. And I, for whatever reason, the year that I was on that show was worked like a full-time employee, but was never brought on full-time. So I was on I'd just wait by the phone, and when they called, I'd work. They liked me, so I worked a lot.
Right.
Um, but then there were people at the time I was on the show, the other correspondents who were all full-time employees were Stephen Colbert, Ed Helms, Rob Corddry, Samantha Bee, and then me.
Wow.
And Carrell had just cycled off the show and was just hitting with 40-year-old virgin and becoming a movie star.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, that was my role. So I was there for a year.
Um, what did you learn in that year? What's the most valuable lesson?
Good question, Michael. My first thought, I don't know if it's a valuable lesson, but it reinforced the idea that some of the most miserable people I know in this world are comedians. That people, it goes back to that, find what irritates you and makes you angry. Um, it's a grind to make sausage for any content funnel that needs to happen, right? We talk about podcasts. It's a constant, you need to feed the machine.
Yeah,
Well, think of these shows that are produced on a daily basis. You need to keep making content. So it
yeah,
becomes a grind. And part of what makes you a good comedian is finding stuff that irritates you. And it becomes this, if you're around that after a while, it becomes hard to be happy. So in that show, I worked with some brilliant people. I'll always be thankful for my experience at Daily Show. It's the Harvard of comedy and still is in many ways to me. Um, but it had people that were like, it's time to make the hot dogs, man. We got to find stuff that pisses me off and write some jokes.
somebody said once
Yeah.
that um, everything is fun until you have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine reading the news for a living
Yeah.
every night. Fire,
Yeah.
children being killed, war, mayhem every night.
Yeah.
And now the weather.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of truth there. It's a great sentiment. I agree with that. Yeah.
uh, all right. So, and by the way, I've had the same experience. I've met, I haven't, circulated among comedians in the way you have, but the comedians that I've met in my time in showbiz, and even now, when you have dinner with them, they're not that much fun. They're not the same
Yeah.
persona. I find you to be very authentic. I loved my time
Oh,
with you at this event that we did, and even now,
yeah.
there's joy in your eyes, and there's spark and intelligent conversation.
Yeah.
But the average comedian at dinner was no fun at all. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of, maybe this is too simple, but there's a lot of neuroses in
Yes.
comedians. Am I good enough? They're always chasing the next bit. You can
Yeah.
probably speak more articulately about this than I can.
Yeah. I mentioned that I've been watching these documentaries about Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys. Bruce Springsteen is mentioned in one of these documentaries, and he makes the observation in the music business, it draws people that there are things that are broken
Yeah,
about them.
yeah,
And I think it's the same way in comedy. We're broken a little bit
yeah.
because
A lot of
otherwise, and one of my jokes is I used to be a comedian, then I got better. I, you know, and for me personally, I can't speak to anybody else's journey, but for me personally, part of the reason why I was a comedian is because I needed that void filled for me to have an audience say, "We like you, you're good."
yeah,
And the moment that I realized that that's what I was getting out of it, and that was an inside job for me that I needed to address, then I could release the need to try to get up in front of an audience and get approval. Um, so I think there is a lot of broken people that are drawn to these creative fields, and we need them. It's the sign of a healthy society, in my point, when we have a lively art culture and creativity. But there are reasons why in the entertainment industry there are so many nightmare stories of personal destruction,
yeah.
overdoses, divorces, suicide, sexual predators, because that is what draws people to this world. So I think for me, I always felt like I was a little bit of an outsider because I was a little bit more joyful than most, and a little bit more optimistic about humankind than most, which may have been the part of the reason why I didn't have the lasting power of other people. I don't know.
We're starting to get some vibrations on end of life type, I don't know, compilations for Paul McCartney. And everybody
Oh,
says
yeah.
McCartney is one of the most well-adjusted,
Yeah.
humane, and most prodigious artists of all time. Decade
Yeah.
after decade. I mean, you could say there was some sleepy years there, but here's a
Yeah.
guy, man, who has churned it out, not just music, multiple formats of music. He's written songs for other people. He wrote two number one hits
Yeah.
for Badfinger, I think, back in
Yeah.
the day. Um, I He's also scored classical music. He's also uh, he's not afraid to delve into other creative things. He's learning new instruments all the
Yeah.
time. This is rare. I think
Yeah.
an anomaly in the creative world.
I agree. You've seen Get Back, the behind the
No, but
scenes stuff?
here's my
Yeah.
problem with this. The redhead
Yeah.
will not watch that because just because it's too much inside baseball for her, and it's like six
Yeah.
hours, right?
Yeah. It's a chore to
So
get through
she's
it.
going on. She's going to go see her mom in South Carolina the weekend after next, and I shall be watching Get Back all 6 hours.
Okay. Yeah,
Finally,
I watch it and I was glad when it was over. I was
okay.
like, okay, it's good. But one of the things that stood out to me, and this is why I'm glad you brought up Paul McCartney. I've always identified with Paul McCartney because to me, when I look at them and Get Back, you've got a 20-something group of incredible musicians at the height of their creative power, right? And McCartney, at least in my estimation, bristles with some of George Harrison and John Lennon at points because he has a work ethic that wants to. He's like, we're artists, but we've got to create. We've got a good thing. Let's make it great.
Yes.
And he's struggling as a 24-year-old guy to communicate with his friends of like, hey, I don't mean to be a jerk, but can we work on this little note here or this passage? And instead, George Harrison and John Lennon are like, who the F are you, man? I'm an artist. I'm a freewheeling, and McCartney's like, no, man, we got this little thing. We got this window. So let's work on this thing. So I've always identified with McCartney. I think you're right. That marriage of having incredible creativity and talent combined with an incredible work ethic and a sense of we are churning out things for public consumption
Yeah.
is a rare combination.
The Beatles are, of course, very well documented. There's tons of books that talk about how when the Beatles, after they started to spread their wings a little bit, still with George Martin, but taking a more active hand in production and arrangement and stuff like that.
Mhm.
The other Beatles would be out on Friday and Saturday night. McCartney would go into the studio alone with an engineer and work out those
Yeah.
extravagant bass lines that he's so famous for.
Yeah.
They take time,
Mhm.
everybody, to come up with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's why he wasn't just playing basic 1-4-5 progressions, which was what the bass was famous for. This is how
Mhm.
McCartney became one of the preeminent bass players of our lifetime, and also elevated the Beatles' music to places it would never have gone otherwise.
Yeah.
This theory about work ethic shows up over and over again in not just the arts, but also professionalism, Bob, even presentation
Yeah.
skills. Think about
Yeah.
Seinfeld was asked one time his best advice for comedians, and he goes, "Finish your bits,"
Mhm.
because a lot of comedians go on with half-baked ideas; they're not fully curated. I forget
Yeah.
exactly how he said it, but that was the essence of it. It
Yeah.
reminds me of the old joke about country music, and country music has come a long way in the last 30 years. But back in the day, back when you were in Nebraska, the funny joke about country music was, I like country music, but it seems like most of the songs aren't finished.
Yeah. Yeah. I can
So
see
to
that.
hang in there a
Yeah.
bit longer, let's move the conversation to presentations and what you're
Yeah.
teaching clients at Lowe's and other places.
Yeah.
People don't even really know what a story is. Like I'm teaching story, and they go up and they tell what I would call an anecdote. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no character, there's no protagonist, there's no character development, there's no moral or happy ending or even inspiration to the story. It's just something that happened.
Uh,
I'm like, dude, that's not a story. A
yeah.
story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right?
Yeah. 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 That Joseph Campbell, who's one of the, godfathers of story structure, has a real, he has multiple steps in it, but boils down to a 3-act story structure.
The hero's
And
journey.
that when we talk about, yeah, the hero's
Yeah.
journey, likable hero, introduce a turning point, and then obstacles that could never overcome. Lo and behold, they do, and they're changed for the better for it. And that I lean on with a lot of my coaching with storytelling is, when in doubt, lean on what it has worked for generations with
Yeah.
storytelling.
You
The
you
other
find
thing
it,
that you talked about, Michael, earlier that I bring up a lot with the people I coach is authenticity doesn't happen uh, by mistake. It
yeah.
takes rehearsal and practice. It takes Paul McCartney playing a bass line 100 times before it looks like it's just off the top of his head. And it's the
100%.
same way with presentations. Yeah.
You can't fake being natural. And one of the
Right.
things about speaking that's so fascinating for me is because there's a lot of negative emotions associated with being in front of people. Um,
Mm.
the best speakers are authentic because when you're authentic and natural, you're more believable. But you can't
Yeah.
ever get there because you're so worried about whether you're having a bad hair day or you don't know your
Yeah.
content
Yeah.
or you're nervous. How can you be natural
Yeah.
if you're nervous? So we got to get you to a
Yeah.
place where you're in a natural state and then everything improves. And part of that,
Yeah.
ironically, it's the old catch 22. How do you get better at speaking? You do more speaking. You do the
Yeah.
thing that you
Do more
don't
speaking.
like so that you can get better at it.
Yeah. And I tied into my acting experience. One of the things I learned early in acting is rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. And then when you get in the room, forget everything.
Oh,
And just forget everything, meaning just try to be so present that you don't have to think of the words. It's there because you've rehearsed it,
yeah,
but then you're feeding off the energy of the room, and what organically happens in that room is what's meant to happen.
yeah,
So, in other words, and I share that with the people that I coach, is sometimes we rehearse so much, we get in our mind a greatest hits that we're going to roll out in front of an audience. And we forget that part of being a really good presenter is being present in the moment and open to the mistakes that happen,
yeah,
quote unquote, mistakes that happen. Those are gifts. And that tells you that you're being alive and being a good communicator when things go off script.
yeah. Or how
And,
about
you
just
know,
being open to things that happen, not just the mistakes?
yeah,
This is the problem inherent with, say, PowerPoint. PowerPoint is a linear presentation tool, which means you cannot do slide 13 before you do slide 12. And so you
yeah,
got to do everything in complete sequence, which takes all of the spontaneity. I mean, you really have to mechanize the spontaneity if you're doing a 27
yeah,
slide PowerPoint show.
yeah.
That's why I moved off PowerPoint probably 15 years ago now. It's a prisoner, it's a hostage situation.
Ah,
You can't move off your slides and you've got to do it in this progression. And if somebody in the room wants to go down a rabbit hole with something important, you have to say, well, let me finish my slides. By the way, the slides are what I think you probably wanted to know today. They're not really what you want to know. They're just my best guess.
yeah,
I mean, the whole thing is
yeah,
just quicksand.
yeah. No, I can see that. I come from the school of thought that slides can be a cheat sheet,
Yes.
um, that they can be used as a way to remind you of your talking points so you
Yes.
don't lose important information. But I totally get what you're saying. The most important thing is to be present in the moment and aware of what the room needs, not
Yeah.
what you want to deliver, but what the room needs you to deliver.
You bet.
Is the most important thing.
So what happened at the Daily Show, man? Why only a year?
That's a good question. I still don't know to this day exactly what happened there. Uh, and I've told people that, and I'm not alone. That's part of the things that all kids should know is the business of show, that is show business, is I had an agent at the time. We negotiated a new deal with the Daily Show when my year contract was concluding. We had a signed contract. Everything was good. It was another freelance deal. It was like, you'll work when we call you, but I was cool with that because that's what I had been doing. And then they never called again. And I don't know why to this day. I don't know if there was something, did I pass gas in a room that was offensive to somebody? I don't know. Uh, but like I said, there's been other people before me and after me at the Daily Show that have had these weird kind of departures as well. There was a lady before me, I forget the name of the correspondent, that predated me, that she found out she no longer worked at the show, and she showed up at the office one day and somebody else had her desk.
Hmm.
So part of this, what I mentioned earlier, this is an industry that invites dysfunction. There are dysfunctional people that are trying to work themselves out in this industry.
Yeah.
And what makes it complicated on a daily show is you get dysfunctional people that are then promoted to supervise people. And they don't know what the
Murphy's
hell they're
Law?
doing as supervisors.
Oh, the Peter principle. That's what that called. When the people
Okay.
that shouldn't be promoted get promoted.
Right.
Well, plus I think
So,
that, don't you think that, I don't think anybody from any HR team from a TV show has ever won an award. I mean, HR is
Yeah.
not their strong suit, right?
Yep. Yep. I would agree with that. I
You
think
ever think about
they're
that
really
though?
good at the
That
creative part.
you ever think about these people you were working with? They all became like super, super famous, super successful.
Yeah.
Do you ever think, what if?
Oh yeah. I totally, I went through the 7 or whatever stages of grieving after that, denial, anger, acceptance, all that stuff.
Go to
There's
their
a
house,
photo.
go to their house and burn it
Yeah.
down. Remember that
But
stage?
this is the thing. A couple of thoughts on that. There's a photo of me on election night 2004 in studio. It was the only time they put me in studio was election night. They gave me a heads up like 2 days before it. Outside of that, I was always a field produced piece on video. And there's a picture of that night of me with the other correspondents. And it is a murderer's row of comedians, right? It's Stephen Colbert, Ed Helms, Rob Corddry, Samantha Bee, and me. And my thought is I'm the Pete Best of that photo. I'm the guy who, Pete Best is the fifth Beatle. He's like right before they became multi, whatever. Pete Best was a Beatle for a little bit. I was a Daily Show correspondent for a little bit. The other thing that occurs to me is what I've got to tell myself in those moments, because I definitely have those moments, Michael, even today, of like, damn it, it would have been nice to have the money and some of the things that some of the people I work with now enjoy, but it's a trade-off. And I'd rather have the money without the fame than just have the fame, because fame does not put food on your plate and it messes with your mind.
You'd still be
Uh,
swimming. You'd still be swimming in the petri dish.
yes. So I think of a Stephen Colbert. I think he was a well balanced individual. At least that was my indication when I interacted with him. I'd like to think he's doing well personally, but I think that there is a very big sacrifice that has to happen with any professional who pursues their profession in such a big way that their personal life has to take a back seat. And so those are the things that go through my mind. Is I'm not going to get caught up in some of these, like Ed Helms has, I don't know how many millions of dollars now, and probably has multiple homes and all that stuff. But he has the pain in the ass of being Ed Helms now everywhere he
Yeah.
goes.
Well, in our
So
society, we kind of glorify the top of the triangle, and
yeah,
what you never know is what kind of problems await at the top of the triangle. Uh,
totally.
it sounds kind of, I don't know. It sounds kind of wishy to say it like this, but I think it's true that things happen the way they're supposed to happen. I mean, you just got back
Yeah,
from a beautiful vacation with your wife and
yeah,
children, a vacation you probably wouldn't be able to take if you were at the top of the triangle,
totally. No way. And
right?
I wouldn't be married if I
Yeah,
had stuck with entertainment. I've talked to my wife about this because I had to make a choice between my career and trying to be a good husband and a good dad.
yeah.
And I made the choice to try to be a good husband and a good dad.
Oh, you made the right
And
choice.
I'll live with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got something cool happening this year. You're the president of your Rotary Club. Which club is this?
Yes. It is the Rotary Club of Ponte Vedra. We're in Nocatee, Florida. We're just south of Jacksonville.
Okay.
And it is an honor, and I'm very excited about it. Yeah.
How many people are in your club?
We have, I think currently right now we have 26 on
Okay.
our roll call. We're a small club. We'll be 5 years in existence this February in 2023.
I always
But we're
say
we're a
that
mighty club.
presidents and district governors always bring not only their personality to the gig, but they bring their skill set.
Yeah.
When I was district governor, I used to famously ask people either some variation of this question: what do you do for work, or what are you retired from, depending on what station in
Ah,
life they were in. And
yeah.
because that told me what they were really good at, and maybe even on occasion what they were passionate about. Because presidents bring, if they're a farmer, they bring a nurturing type of thing to the presidency. If they're a numbers
Yeah.
person, they bring measurement. Do you find that you bring your entertainment sensibilities and humor to the presidency? And this is regardless of whether or not the last 5 presidents had a sense of humor. Do you find you
Yeah.
can't help yourself?
Yeah, I definitely think you're right, Michael, that that's inherently in me. So we just had our passing of the gavel event last night at our club, and that's where you transfer power from one president to the next. And I said to the club membership there, I said, there are things that I do well, and there's things that I don't do well. And one of the things that I know that I do well is I bring passion, and I bring, whether I intend to or not, I'm an entertainer. Things come out of my mouth sometimes that people laugh at.
Yeah.
So I've just got to embrace it. That's a strength of mine, and go with it.
Well, I think your club's lucky to have you. I'm
Oh,
not only
thanks.
glad you're a Rotarian, I'm proud that you're a Rotarian. And it's, again,
Yeah, thank you.
just a pleasure speaking with you today. I hope we get to do more together.
Yeah, likewise, Michael. It's good that we've connected, and thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Let's talk before we go about your book, Bob. It's called The
Yeah.
BS Dictionary. It's available on in all good bookstores and on Amazon. Tell us about this BS Dictionary. What is it?
Yeah, it's the full title is Uncovering the Origins and True Meanings of Business Speak. So BS stands for the traditional BS, but also it stands for business speak. The origin story will kind of explain why it happened. Is I'm married to a woman who's a chief marketing officer of a company. And about 7 years ago, she was working from home one day. And I've known this woman for 25 plus years, right? I get her, we can communicate well. She got on a conference call and she started using terms I'd never heard come out of her mouth before. And it was like tiger team, straw man. I think Internet of Things was probably in that conversation. And I'm a comedian. I'm not a trained business person. So when I heard these phrases, I was like, what the hell does that mean? And she got off the phone, and I found it funny that there was like this little language of business that she only used with her colleagues, but didn't use anywhere else, and that they were mimicking back to her. So as a comedian, I started to keep a list and write jokes about some of these things. A couple of years later, I'm doing my presentation skills coaching at T-Mobile in Seattle. And during one of the breaks, I tell one of the participants in my class about this list that I'm keeping of these jokes.
Yeah.
And this guy says, oh, I've got a list of things we do the same here at T-Mobile. And at that point, I said, there should be a dictionary for all these things because you're doing it, I'm doing it, and other people are responding to it. So then I started to write a book. And the book is a collection. The finished book is about 300 commonly used business terms that we use in the workplace of English speaking business to communicate ideas that we generally don't use outside of those four walls. So we're talking EBITDA, we're talking scalable, stuff like that. The new normal, net, win-win, all these things that we just, if you do business, you're like, oh, that's how we talk business. But when you stop and think about it, you're like, where the hell did this come from?
So
And
are you giving legitimate definitions? Are you giving humorous
yes,
definitions or a combination of both?
we're giving both. So each entry, if, for instance, for EBITDA, we will give you the traditional definition of what EBITDA stands for. Then we will give you the BS definition, and that's the joke writing.
Yeah.
That's when we'll tell you, here's what it really means when somebody says EBITDA, for example, in the workplace. And then, and to me, this is the greatest part about this book, is I partnered up with a former researcher for the Washington Post, is my co-author. And we did a very deep dive, which is a BS term, a deep dive on the origins of each of these phrases. So after the definition and the BS definition, we give you in great detail, and it's multi-sourced, and we work with the Oxford English Dictionary, by the way, in the UK to make sure we were correct here. Here's who coined this phrase, when it started to demonstrate itself in communication in the business world. So it's got great origin stories with each one as well. I'm super proud of this book. I've done a lot of creative stuff, Michael, in my time, but this is the book, this is the piece that I'm most proud of because it's, to me, it's a book I would read. I like this stuff. And when
And
I do
people
stuff that I feel like I would use, then I know I've done well.
and people are noticing you're about to do a TED Talk in a foreign land.
Yes, I'm going to Vienna, Austria this October to do a TED Talk on this very topic.
How does that
Yeah.
happen?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know how it happened. I did a storytelling show in Jacksonville, Florida, where I'm from. And I don't know if this has any correlation to what happened in Vienna, but it's an interesting coincidence at the very least. I did a storytelling show in Jacksonville to great effect. It went over well. And about a week later, I got an email from one of the organizers at the TED Talk in Vienna trying to find me and
Was
saying,
it,
we'd like you.
so
Yeah,
was the bit recorded?
it was, but it hadn't hit online yet.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and one of the other speakers that I had at the Jacksonville show had been a host of several TEDx talks in Jacksonville.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking maybe she ran it up the line to say, hey, this guy's good at this stuff. You might
Right.
want to check him out. Either way, about a week later, literally about a week after this performance, I get an email from this guy who reaches out to my co-author. He can't find me, but he finds my co-author. And he says, we are trying to find Bob Wiltfong to have him submit for our TED Talk in Vienna. And I'm like, what the hell is this about? So I reach out to them. I've never done a TED Talk. And they were an open door. They said, whatever you are passionate about and feel like would be interesting to our audience, submit an application for it. So I did a one-page about BS and what I learned about BS when I wrote the book, and they like it. So they're bringing me over in October to speak to a live theater audience about it, and then it'll be posted on YouTube.
Congratulations, man. That's huge.
Thank you.
We'll have to
Thank you
visit
very
afterward.
much.
I'm interested in your impressions. I've helped, you probably have too, helped a lot of people get TED Talks, and
Yeah.
and I'm eager to hear how yours turns out.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of drafting it right now with some coaching. So I'm as interested as you are as how this is going to turn out. Yeah.
Um, what a pleasure, man. It's been great visiting with you. This is Bob Wiltfong, everybody. His new book is called The BS Dictionary. It's available on Amazon. TED Talk coming to your YouTube channel or soon, I assume. Don't forget to get video,
Yes.
Bob.
Yeah, will do.
And again, I hope our paths cross again soon, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.